chipped under my minimal strength. That didn't matter to me. I kept jabbing, and my hands felt like marshmallows with the boxing gloves I wore. Elisa's were pink. She grunted from my side while making her own jabs, and her reddened face was almost comical. She had this little scowl on her face as she punched her bag like it had personally offended her in some way. Irina's hard voice broke my scrutiny.
"Eyes forward, Swan,"
she admonished from across the gym, and I refocused my attention to my punching bag. I took a deep breath and tried to do what Alice was doing, what Carmen had encouraged us to do. I envisioned it as an offender, and began jabbing. I probably looked like a total SPAZ, with my fists flailing ahead. These boxing classes weren't really meant for the purpose of perfecting my form. It was just supposed to be cathartic and releasing. And it was. My lackadaisical approach to her sport displeased Irina.
"Keep your shoulders straight, Swan,"
she instructed, and I inwardly growled as my punches grew harder and stronger. Anger was always a good emotional projection for this activity, as Carmen often reminded me. This was only my third class for boxing. It was a little too early to say whether or not I enjoyed it, but I couldn't deny the release it granted me. Unlike Alice, I preferred it to yoga, or as I call it, limb torture. My favorite so far would have to be the judo courses. Judo was really intriguing and low impact. It wasn't about my own strength, but using others' strengths against them. It was okay to be a little girl in judo. In boxing, not so much.
"You're hitting high again,"
Irina scolded in obvious annoyance, but the triple ding of the overhead bell indicated that time was up. I inwardly smiled. Saved by the bell. Irina took her position a little too seriously. Alice huffed, and turned to me with a big grin.
"I'm getting really good at this,"
she exclaimed and held up one hot pink gloved fist enthusiastically. I rolled my eyes, sweating a little and awkwardly swatting a dampened lock of hair from my face, while slapping her glove with my plain, red one. "Sure, Al, if I were a punching bag who met you in a dark alley, I'd be petrified," I mumbled, making her smile slightly waver. Guilt consumed me at managing to deter her enjoyment of the activity. "I'm playing," I smiled. It felt hollow. It probably appeared so, too. There was another hollowness, one that wasn't visible and concrete to the people I loved. I was thankful for its hidden nature and that I could carry its burden on my own. Alice shrugged, and we spent our time extracting our gloves and tape in the locker room. Alice was too good to me. When I'd told her of Carmen's plans to enroll me in all these classes, she was eager to accompany me. It was sweet and selfless of her to be so supportive when I was obviously awful company. Her enthusiasm rarely faltered in regards to it. She had gone pretty full out with picking out necessary and occasionally pink equipment and researching ways in which to excel. It brought a pang to my empty chest that my spirit commonly spoiled our afternoon lessons. She was unusually quiet on the ride home as I gazed out at the green vegetation that blurred past, and I hated myself for upsetting her. It was late September and getting cold again. I wasn't certain if I welcomed the change of season or resented it. I wanted to freeze the summer and remain in the stagnation that had given me hope, and yet I wanted it all to pass and become a distant memory.
"Want to do something for the weekend?"
Elisa's voice broke me from my silent reflection, and I shrugged in response. We didn't usually do anything on weekends. Mostly, I just did nothing whatsoever. Tomorrow morning, we'd have yet another lesson with yet another instructor, and that would keep me occupied for the morning, until I repeated it. My existence was dull and full of schedules that were meant to keep me distracted and focused all at the same time. Mondays were Carmen, Tuesdays were judo, Wednesdays were my evenings with Carlisle, Thursdays were Carmen, Fridays were boxing, and Saturdays were yoga. It was an empty loop of school, offices, gym, the kitchen, and the bedroom. I hated to appear ungrateful of everyone's support. Carlisle, Alice, Esme, and even Jasper were beyond fantastic. Carmen had spent numerous amounts of hours constructing the perfect course of treatment, balancing traditional medicine, and her own methods of therapy into something I'd gain maximum benefit from. In the grand scheme of things, it was effective, as far as I could tell. I still couldn't enter the closet, but I could feel myself growing more comfortable with attempting. Having already given up on trying weeks prior, I'd thought I had to break through the previous day, when Jasper somehow convinced me to give him a brief fist bump. I'd been annoyed with him as we sat in the lunchroom, and he'd extended his hand across the table, gently encouraging. At the time, I couldn't comprehend his sudden interest, and Alice had been incensed with his persistence. I mostly did it so that she'd cease her shrill protests in his ear, but a little ache, in the distance of my mind, wanted the release of the absolute breakdown it was supposed to grant me instead. I quickly knocked his knuckles with my own, and withdrew, before Alice could even realize it was over. I was shocked that even though it felt uncomfortable, and fleetingly alarming for my skin, to touch his, I'd managed it without any major anxiety at all. It was small, and I wouldn't be attempting anything beyond that one simple gesture, but I'd grown hopeful and excited at the proof of my progress. Jasper had been smug, and strangely excited as well. I suppose that he'd felt a little advantaged, being the only guy beside Edward that I had touched successfully since the incident 2 years ago. Unfortunately, Carmen had disagreed and soured my feeling of accomplishment when I'd told her. "It's just the medication clouding the response," she'd informed me with a sad smile, as my own fell in return. She didn't want me to get false hope from the artificial effects of the medication, and while I respected it, I resented it all the same. It had felt good to know that progress was being made. She assured me that the improvement was there, but it wasn't solid and substantial to me. I wanted proof. Resistant and clinging to the only glimmer of positivity that I'd had in months, I ignored her, and made monumental macaroons, in a refusal to abandon my sense of accomplishment. Now, the whole thing seemed ridiculous and trivial, and impossibly dimmer. I sighed, as we rounded the corner to our street, and idly pondered what to make for dinner. I only ever cooked 3 nights of the week, and tonight was Carlisle's night. He liked beef. I was quickly constructing a mental list of side dishes, when I saw it. My eyes flashed to the driveway and called a twinkle of silver. My heart stopped beating right before it began thrashing against my ribcage. I could feel my face pale and my lips part, as the entire world froze, and my mind went blank. And then I was slammed with a maelstrom of thoughts and emotions that made my hands tremble as they instinctively reached for the door handle, and began fumbling to open it.
"Bella."
Alice ripped me from my near exit of the moving car, and I met her gaze, because I couldn't trust my mind enough to know if it was real, which should have bothered me, but it didn't. The expression Alice wore, as she stared ahead at the driveway, and the Volvo that was parked there, confirmed my vision, and made my heart thump impossibly harder, until it was an erratic wish-whoosh, wish-whoosh, that fuzzied my hearing. Alice met my frantic gaze, and her brow was furrowed deeply in concern. I couldn't keep my hands or breathing steady, and I could feel my lips go dry and cold. I couldn't remember feeling so much of anything since the day he'd left. I was concerned about fainting, and my concern only served to magnify my erratic pulse. I was so alert that I could feel every tiny thing, my senses hyper-aware, and unconsciously seeking out a soothing current of electricity that might be close. "Alice," I gasped my plea, and my shaky hand remained on the handle of the door. As she stared at me, the car was only going at the crawl, as her eyes bore into mine, conflicted for a fraction of a second, until they finally snapped ahead. Something in my gaze must have settled her conflict, because her foot suddenly slammed on the gas. We were lurched backward into our seats, as she swiftly closed the distance between the Porsche and the driveway. I was out of the car and darting to the door of the mansion before Alice could even get her car door open. It didn't seem real that he could actually be here, in this house, at this very moment. It made my chest vibrate faster as I barreled through the front door. My feet carried me unthinkingly through the lowest level of the house in search of his presence. When I didn't find it, I darted up the staircase to the second floor, only barely realizing that Carlisle's study door stood ajar and illuminated. I flew into the large office, expecting to find what I sought inside, but instead finding Carlisle behind his desk on the phone, as me stoic at his side. He shot up from his position, and dropped the receiver to his desk as I entered. I turned to leave, to continue searching, until I found him, but Carlisle's panicked voice stopped me.
Bella, wait.
He called. I was barely capable of planting my feet to the floor to regard him, but I did. I faced him, and was startled by the panicked expression both him and me wore. It terrified me. Where is he? I grated, my voice thick and heavy, with an emotion that momentarily frightened me further. I flinched at the pure desperation that colored my voice and actions, but couldn't be diverted even though I realized that this particular reaction was hardly suitable. Carlisle raised his hands in some kind of submissive gesture, as his alarmed eyes stared fixedly into mine.
You're getting yourself worked up, Bella. You need to calm down,
But I'd already turned, and exited the study, because Esme's minute and fleeting glance at the ceiling above us gave me the information I needed. I ascended the second flight of stairs, Carlisle's voice following behind me as I took them 2 steps at a time. I ignored his calls because my body was acting of its own accord, requesting what it knew to be in close proximity, and growing impatient with its prolonged absence. My tunnel vision led me down the hall, and to the closed door of the bedroom that had known only my loneliness for the past 4 months. I barreled through this one as well, no longer capable of handling the anticipation and anxiety of finally seeing him. And he was there on the bed, shirtless, and lying on his stomach with his face buried into a pillow. My body became an independent vessel that hummed in eager delight as I gazed at his bare back rising and falling in a steady rhythm. It could feel the edges of his buzzing static, and it wanted closer. My heart ached at the sight of him, painfully constricting my chest, and making it swell with months of the restrained and neglected emotion that had been reserved for him alone. And my mind screamed its steely objection to both reactions, because my body, heart, and mind he'd wounded them all. I saw his back rise with a deep sigh, as he suddenly mumbled into the pillow.
I'm not avoiding you, Carlisle. I'm just tired.
He spoke. I think I might have gasped at the sound of his voice, my body, heart, and mind all recognizing and reacting to the velvet mumble in various ways. My arms wound tightly around my torso as I felt the void fill, and briefly contemplated whether or not to even allow it. Edward, likely having heard my gasp, jerked his head to the side and faced me. When my eyes finally met his, locked and widened, it was like being torn in 3. My arms tightened around my torso in restraint. His eyes were dark and tired, red and swollen, dull and empty, until he met my gaze, and they suddenly sparkled and shone. Gorgeous. My body, heart, and mind flooded my instincts with confusing and overwhelmingly contradictory urges. I wanted to hug him. I wanted to kiss him. I wanted to stab him in the fucking chest, and tell him to get the hell out of my room. My feet held me firmly grounded and glued to the carpet as he rolled off the bed in one oddly clumsy motion, and stumbled to the floor, eyes never leaving mine. His lips parted as he stood at the other side of the bed, but no sound emerged. He was just gaping at me with an unreadable expression, penetrating me with his piercing and shining green stare. His hair was falling in his eyes, longer now than I'd ever seen it. If I could have looked away from his captivating gaze, I probably would have been looking at his bare chest, or stabbing it. My knees were weak, and the pure contrast of my weakness to the strength I'd felt only minutes before made me angry. So much so, that my hands curled into tight fists under my wrists, and trembled with some emotion. Too many emotions. My chest felt tight, and aching with pressure. The wish-whoosh in my ears began to garble and crackle. My vision grew distorted and cloudy, and I worried that maybe Carlisle had been right about my being too worked up. I wondered, as Edward's expression transformed into one of abject fear, if he could see the emotions on my face as I trembled. I wondered why he'd be afraid. I realized, far too late to rein them in, that tears had formed and began trailing down my cheeks.
Bella.
Carlisle's voice from behind me violently ripped me away from mine, and I